Hi everyone. It's 6 o'clock in the evening, December 4th. So this is the first session of today. And this is part of the 100 years of the world wars and the post-war regional collaboration and the good governance. How to make a new world order. So shall we start this session? Is okay? I just take attendance and Professor Haba is here, Patrick Boyd is here, and Dr. Chauhan is here, and Chris Pope is here, right? I can see your face, but
oh yes, sorry.
yeah, you're here. Yeah,
yes.
I'm sure. Okay, so the panelists, all the panelists gather here today, all right?
Yes.
So this is the first session today. We're going to discuss about how to make a new world order. And this first session is to deal with the politics aspect. And the second session will deal with the economic aspect. That's why today's session is the start at the 1800, it means 6 p.m. to 7:30 in the p.m. Not military people, then so 100, 1800. Well, so today, I will try to, we have the four panelists here, and the first front runner is the Professor Haba, and the second is the Professor Boyd, and the third is Dr. Chauhan, and the fourth and last is Professor Pope. Is okay. So now we have the 90 minutes left in this session, and you are given the 15 minutes of the presentation each. And after that, we're going to discuss together. So 4 topics you presented today. It's okay.
Okay.
And we just ask the floor during the question and answer session. So anyone and want to ask raise a question and comment on the presentation, your presentations. So we will hear those kind of questions and comments. Okay. So if not, I will also give questions on your presentations. Right. So first of all, this is the we have it's in the 21st century already. 20 years passed, and started the new millennium. So we have several experience on the new centuries, and we have discussed about the 10 years later and 50 years later. So we have 80 years left to finish this century, but nobody is there in the end of this century, I guess. Well, just start, I have to introduce the Professor Haba, and she's the professor at Aoyama Gakuin University currently. She was former president of the USA Asia Pacific, and she was the vice president of the International Study Association. And currently, she is vice president ISA Asia Pacific regions. And she books so many bunch of books, published so many books, and she wrote so many, more than 100 articles. So she gonna present you today, and the different strategy of the new world order between Europe and Asia in the post-war period. So Professor Haba, it's your floor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Gabe. A very kind introduction. Thank you very much. I'd like to start my presentation. I'd like to share the screen. Thank you. Can you see? Okay. Can you see?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much. The title is United States Different Strategy of New World Order in Divided Asia, Comparing Integrate Europe. I might a little prolong, sorry. So I'd like to start. Introduction. The USA participated in the two world wars and penetrated democracy. In World War I, President Wilson changed the US position for neutral to the war of the end of the war. In the World War II, President Roosevelt entered the war with full freedom against Japanese Pearl Harbor attack. So democracy and war. US had won in both world wars with rising democratic new world order. President Wilson issued Wilson 14 article and to make a post-war world order. Similarly, President Roosevelt with For Freedom together proposed founding the United Nations by more participation effective great powers after World War II. Thereby, he tried to perform the post-war order more effectively than post-war after the World War II, and he considering for freedom protected by four policemen, that is the USA, UK, Soviet Union, and China. So that's why the Soviet Union and China was included because there was with the strong hope of the Roosevelt. US liberal leaders in 20th century was skeptic in the European colonialism and imperialism, imperialistic militarism in 19th century. So that's why including the UK and other European countries, but using military force in a new world order. So that's why not by the rule of horse, but by the law domination and state collaboration, US wished to maintain the peace by regional state collaboration. However, it had been repeatedly shattered down after the war. After the World War II, battle against Nazism, fascism, and militarism of Japan soon turned into fight against new Soviet Union and communism due to the start of Cold War. Because of this, For Freedom had undergone a major transformation in forming the post-war world order, and the strategy of the New World Order has completely different between European strategy and Asian strategy. So here I investigate about was the difference originally designed or was historically circumstances forced to make a difference. So I like to consider change of enemy during the war and against after the war. In Europe after World War II, no community was realized through European integration. However, it did so involving the German and Italian that fought against the World War II, eliminating the Soviet Union, which restored Europe with the highest cost and as a member of Allied. At the security strategy, energy collaboration, ESCE and CSCE by NGO and NPO, and for regional safety and problems. On the other hand, in Asia, especially in East Asia, it is well-known divide and rule strategy was introduced. So Asia as well, not the allied country like a Soviet Union and China, which had fight together against Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan, especially since 1949 establishment of Communist China, the stage network against Asian continent was forced to counter the socialist mainly by Japanese, who is the enemy of the World War II, seeing from the Allied side. So Japan is a very specific position in geopolitically as well. Viewing the Earth from the North Pole, it is really a natural fortress close to the Asian continent toward Pacific Ocean against the Soviet Union, China, or against North Korea. So it contains Asian continent over 3,000 kilometers like that to protect the Pacific Ocean from the Asian continent. So this position presentation investigate and pay attention to the why the New World Order of the United States has been different between Europe and Asia after World War II, and considered merit and demerit and limits post-war New World Order, analyzing focused to European regional integration and Asian disintegration, or aim and limit of the New World Order and divide and rule strategy in the United States. This Japanese position of the geopolitical special position is very similar like now Quad containment policy as East Asian NATO, counter Belt and Road strategy, and collaborating Russia, China. So it is very similar, even though a historical divide and rule policy. The United States world strategy after World War II, the concept of the United States New World Order in post-war, from Tehran meeting to Yalta conference was not strong American leadership like Woodrow Wilson, because the conference, there were three great leaders like Roosevelt in US, Churchill UK, Stalin USSR to make a post-war New World Order. The post-war New World Order vision after World War II should have been based on the territorial inviolability and respect to sovereignty. However, at the end of war, in Moscow Conference, October 10, 1944, Churchill and Stalin talked about the influence of great power as a percentage agreement. And President Roosevelt were trying to mediate the three countries, but ultimately lost leadership because of illness and death in April 1945. Roosevelt's death and Vice President Truman inauguration of Truman Doctrine, 1947, military assistance toward Greece and Turkey by asks of UK brought to the start of the Cold War, or it was already started a matter of controversy among the UK, the US, Soviet Union, the process of envisioning the post-war international order. But as a result of 3-point like Franco-German reconciliation and the difference of Europe and Asian strategy as a post-war world order, and conversion of energy enemy after the policy after the World War in Europe, European integration under the US support, Soviet Union containment policy started. On the other hand, in East Asia, then underlining strategy of East Asian divide and rule was introduced. So the question is why American strategy for Europe could be taken in East Asia as well, international politics of the US world order. So this is my main question. the decisive transformation of the enemy in the post-war period. The Roosevelt believed the Soviet cooperation was essential for Japanese surrender and aspiration to abolish the Japan-Soviet Neutral Treaty and asked Soviet army to enter Japan against Japan. As a result, in Yalta, by the three parties of the US, UK, and Soviet Union, Yalta secret agreement were exchanged. The Soviet Union participated in the war against Japan and invaded the promised territory, North Island, at the request of US in August 9, 1945. Japan accepted the Potsdam Declaration of August 14 and received a letter from surrender of September 2, 45. So as a result, Soviet Union kept its promises to the US, occupying the Kuril and Northern Ireland. At that time, apparently Roosevelt respected the Soviet Union as the allied power and considered Germany and Japan as enemy. However, above all, Roosevelt, who had deep understanding of the Soviet Union and China, Republic of China, died suddenly at the end of the war without seeing the surrender of Germany and Japan. The situation changed drastically from the containment policy toward the Soviet Union. After the Second World War, Truman, who became the president of the US after Roosevelt, and Churchill of the UK, both were warmly wary of the Soviet Union because of the beginning of her overwhelming force of the eastern half of Europe. Therefore, two leaders of the US and UK considered to introduce a containment policy against Soviet Union in Europe and Far East. So it is such things in Europe make a NATO or reconciliation between Germany and France and against the Soviet Union. But in East Asia, Japan and South Korea is so weak, and China turned to a communist country. So Soviet Union and China collaborated. That's why US needed to come to the China and South Korea with military. And at that time introduced a divide and rule policy. A containment policy toward the Soviet Union. NATO First General Secretary Hastings Ismay, British officer, mentioned, keep the American in, Russian out, German down, and NATO started. Stalin, on the other hand, at that time referred as a Stalin Note in March 1952, which offered German integration between East and West for the purpose of neutrality, German unity, and in the center of the European buffer zone on attempt to safety of the Soviet Union. However, the Konrad Adenauer refused German government. After that, Germany joined NATO and pursued rearmament. So through this process, enemies in Europe are completely transformed from Germany to Soviet Union. On the other hand, in the Far East, Roosevelt has hoped for the Chinese administration of Chiang Kai-shek, but in October 1949, Communist Party got power in China. Chiang Kai-shek, Kuomintang administration fled to Taiwan. So after that, Korean War broke out. When the outbreak occurs, U.S. lost its reliance on China's convention in Far East against the coalition of the Soviet Union at the socialist regime in China and North Korea. So this is the conclusion. American New World Order in Asia, why they used a divide and rule policy in Asia. Considering why East Asia was not organized as a region, because main reasons were international factors more than democratic factors, domestic factors, sorry. For the United States, immediately after the war, there was no reliable ally in the new East Asia, or it was extremely limited. The US hope, Chiang Kai-shek, of the Republic of China, but he was forced to flee to Taiwan in December 1949 due to the Communist Party's gaining power. As the consequence of accidental history, Japan became a fortress of the capitalist world after the war against the Soviet Union. China and North Korea socialist camps after the San Francisco Treaty in 1950. The sign started already 1945 when MacArthur occupied Japan. He determined to use different policy toward Japan. He considered to use Showa Emperor as a center of new system in post-war era and people together under the emperor. Why the United States had intervened to East Asia with divide and rule governance differentiated from Europe and ASEAN. East Asian threat of to introduce the Western system were following. First is if Russia, China, North Korea collaborate together as a socialist system, it will become a menace against the US. The second is the US needed a foothold in East Asia to make the New World Order in order to restrain the Soviet Union and China as a counterweight. It was MacArthur's strategy as well. Third is as a result in Japan, such a political soil has been created and autonomous politicians rarely grow, but it was forced to do so by the US strategy. MacArthur's post-war domination to intervene in politicians carefully eliminated such politicians, anti-American nationalist and pro-independent as well. Not only the Communist Party, Socialist Party, but also nationalist independent fractions also had been ousted from the against China and USSR was too strong. The government leading position. Japanese politician could hardly refuse the US strategy from then. It was not because Japanese politicians were politically weak, but the strategy of US divide and rule policy in East Asia against China and USSR were too strong. However, nowadays, with the prosperity of the region and the world, we should reorganize Asia in collaboration with the EU and US to create a new world order appropriate for the latter half of the 21st century. So I needed to very shorten, and I'm really sorry. If you wish to interest, please read my article of the proceeding book. Thank you very much for your very kind hearing. Thank you very much. ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Haba-san. It's he just talked about the U.S. strategy and to Europe and Asia, especially focus on the East Asia issues. And then today, second speaker here, and J. Patrick Boyd. He is currently the associate professor of international politics at Aoyama Gakuin University, as well as the Haba-san's same school. And he specialized in contemporary Japanese politics and foreign policy. And just born in the United States, and he got a PhD from the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology in political science. And he wrote a very, outstanding, the degrees at the PhD thesis. And he worked at the policy studies, H policies, East Asian Forum, Lonza, and among other publications. He just, he taught before at Aoyama University in the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies before. And today, he gonna speak about the American administration, and it's very interesting theme for me, topic. And he gonna talk about the Donald Trump, and I guess that he will refer to the new president of the Joe Biden and his administrations. Okay. So, Patrick, it's your floor.
Thank you very much, Professor. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Pat Boyd, and although my area of expertise is post-war Japanese politics, I've decided with this essay to venture into the somewhat more choppy waters of the politics of my home country, the United States, to consider three related questions. First, we've heard a lot about populism and even nationalism in recent accounts of right-wing politics in the US, but these concepts are often conflated or confused. As someone who has spent considerable time studying nationalism in Japan, I wanted to clarify thinking on how these two phenomena differ. Second, is Donald Trump a nationalist? And finally, if he is, what does this likely mean for American grand strategy and the many countries, including Japan, that will be greatly affected by any shifts in this strategy? To review my conclusions, I find that nationalism and populism are different, but can sometimes be intertwined in practice, that Donald Trump is in fact a practicing nationalist, albeit one whose nationalism differs from that of recent presidents, and that his nationalism can be linked to his efforts to rework American grand strategy. But let's first start with the task of separating nationalism and populism. From my work on nationalism in post-war Japan, I found it's a useful way to treat nationalism in a liberal democratic context is as a discourse. This discourse constructs and reconstructs points of identification and differentiation that define a distinct political community, i.e. the nation, and asserts the form of its dominion over a modern territorial state across time. In practice, this discourse takes the form of a series of recurring and sometimes changing nation-state narratives that tell the story of how the nation's putative qualities or past experiences should define the present nature and actions of its territorial state. One example of a nation-state narrative is what Anatol Lieven has referred to as American Creed nationalism, which he argues was the nationalism practiced by Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential campaign. The story begins with the claim that the American people are defined by a shared ethos valuing liberty, democracy, the law, individualism, and cultural and political egalitarianism. These shared values are said to play a unique role in unifying this nation of immigrants with diverse origins and characteristics. The nation so defined thus places demands on the American state, both to embody these values in its structure and governing practices and to spread them to other parts of the world. Populism can also be treated as a form of discourse, but one that asserts a corrupt elite are undermining the interests of the virtuous people a group populists assert they will defend if given the power to do so. Populism is thus a political claim, one for which the definition of its key term, the people, is often made through reference to available ideological resources, such as liberalism, socialism, authoritarianism, or nationalism. In this way, populism need not involve nationalism and vice versa. So, for example, in the US, mainstream politicians often assume populist stances by claiming the ruling party is serving its own corrupt interests rather than those of the citizenry, and demanding that voters, quote, throw the bums out in the next election. Here, the conception of the people as citizen voters is drawn from political liberalism and thus can serve to reinforce liberal democratic norms. Right-wing populism often defines the people in ways that not only place elites in opposition, but also identify unworthy outgroups inside the polity. These outgroups, even though living within the polity, are argued to be outside the nation, a treatment often given to ethnic or cultural minorities and immigrants. Here, the clean up-down axis of the people versus the elites in a single polity is complicated through the addition of an inside-outside axis that also pits the people against both domestic outgroups and groups outside the polity, such as external elites and other nations. A review of analyses of Trump's 2016 campaign rhetoric and the reaction to it reveals a consensus among scholars that Trump is a right-wing populist who, in addition to using anti-elite rhetoric, also identifies domestic outgroups, immigrants, Muslims, and African Americans, and external outgroups, globalists, other nations, as threats to the virtuous in-group, which he defines in ethno-national terms, the native-born white Christian majority. It is here where Trump animates his populism with what has been called white nationalism or Christian nationalism. By defining the American nation in this way, Trump was able to make corresponding demands on the American state in its name. These included proposals to build a wall on the southern border and to crack down on immigrants supposedly to protect the in-group from job competition and crime. Calls for unity among Christians in the face of the threat of Islam, and a proposal to ban Muslims from entering the US, supposedly to protect the in-group's faith and to reduce the risk of domestic terrorist attacks. Promises to renegotiate or discontinue international trade deals in order to return high-paying manufacturing jobs, supposedly for the benefit of the in-group, and calls to dissolve or refashion US alliances to reduce the cost of American foreign policy and thus the tax burden on the in-group. There is strong evidence that Trump's nationalist rhetoric resonated with voters and contributed to his 2016 election victory. Gorski and Whitehead et al. Argue Trump's rhetoric resonated with a subset of evangelical voters, perhaps more than 2/3, and can be linked in statistically significant ways with support for Trump in the election. Exit polls also show Trump winning large majorities with voters concerned about immigration, trade, and terrorism, as well as those unconcerned about racial justice. Perhaps of greater significance are the findings that Trump's nationalism both fit with longstanding patterns of non-dominant nationalisms in America and found a receptive audience that may well have been longing for its message. Levin and Gorski argue Trump's ethno-nationalism largely conforms to traditional patterns of nationalism in America, including white nationalism and Christian nationalism. Bonikowski and DiMaggio show that about 1/3 of the population should have been particularly receptive to Trump's ethno-national appeals because they have medium levels of national pride and thus a desire for redress, but define American identity in especially exclusionary ways. Colin Cowell and Hal Brands identified what they saw as Trump's new America First grand strategy early in his administration. They argue it was made up of the following basic assumptions: prioritized goals, perceived threats, and preferred actions. The basic assumptions are the international environment is a dangerous place from which powerful forces threaten US national security, damage the US economy, and pollute American society. The prioritized goals are maintaining the country's physical security and ensuring its economic well-being and way of life. The perceived threats to achieving these goals are radical Islam, unfair international trade deals, especially with China, and illegal immigration. And the preferred actions to achieve these goals and fight the threats are to embrace economic nationalism in trade policy, to implement extreme homeland security, to follow amoral transactionalism in dealings with other countries, and to massively expand the US military to deter external threats, but not to engage in military action overseas or support existing alliances. I've underlined among the perceived threats and preferred actions parts that resonate with Trump's nationalism previously described. Our evaluations of how well Trump has been able to implement this new grand strategy have been mixed. Some studies do not find much meaningful change in security policy in Trump's first years in office. Others note Trump's success in withdrawing from or renegotiating trade deals, leaving the Paris Agreement on climate change, imposing tariffs, and starting a trade war with China. There is consensus that his new grand strategy has had the greatest impact on immigration policy. More recently, Trump reached phase one trade deals with China and Japan and demanded significant increases in host nation support from the US's Asian allies. My conclusions are, first, nationalism and populism are different, but can sometimes be intertwined and practiced, especially in the context of radical right-wing politics. Second, Donald Trump, both as a candidate and as US president, has practiced a persistent nationalism, albeit framed as right-wing populism. Third, this nationalism can be linked to a number of areas in his reworking of American grand strategy, including the failure to unambiguously support traditional alliances and relationships with trade partners, two developments of particular concern for Japan. Now, you may say, now that we've got to this point, so what? Joe Biden just won the presidency, and Donald Trump will no longer be president after about 40 some days. Well, I'd first like to say this. Although Biden's victory in the popular vote will likely be large, his win in the Electoral College is actually not especially large. When all the votes are counted, Trump will have lost a number of states by only tens of thousands of votes, where millions of votes were cast. According to National Public Radio, it's hard to argue this represents a landslide of historic proportions, given that out of slightly less than 60 presidential elections, the winner has received more electoral votes in 37 contests.
Pronto? Mi senti? Senti,
we seem to have a call there. Thank you. These are data from the 2016 and 2020 exit polls for the presidential election. And you can see that Donald Trump did very well, obviously with white voters, but not unusually well for the Republican Party nominee. By way of comparison, in 2012, Mitt Romney, then the Republican Party nominee, won about 20% of the white vote, or he won the vote rather by 20 percentage points. Where Trump has done exceedingly well has been with evangelical Christians and whites, who we would refer to as working class whites or whites without college degrees. His support with evangelical voters fell somewhat, in this election in 2020. However, he's still posting extremely large margins with whites without a college degree. And this is what's truly unusual about Donald Trump's support coalition. So this is a very valuable electoral resource and one that future politicians may seek to gain control over. This tweet is from yesterday. I selected it because it is recent and from a prominent senator, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who is a member of the Armed Services Committee and a strong supporter of President Trump. I guess my question here is, will racist xenophobia be Trump's legacy in American foreign policy? Whether someone else adopts Trump's nationalist ideas whether someone else who adopts Trump's nationalist ideas will ultimately succeed in fully implementing the American First grand strategy remains to be seen, but the following seems clear. First, Trump's 2016 electoral victory showed that the critique of America's conventional foreign policies is capable of gaining considerable support from the electorate. Although it seems likely that voters did not elect Trump primarily because of his positions on foreign policies, as one author put it, quote, they did, however, respond to his assaults on free trade, failed wars, free riding allies, and the negative consequences of globalization for American workers, unquote. Second, allies and trading partners alike should take the elements of Trump's grand strategy seriously, as most are linked to ethno-national claims that resonate with an historically stable subset of Americans and will thus be there as a resource for future politicians seeking to follow in Trump's footsteps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. It's very interesting in the presentation. Thank you very much for analyzing how the Biden administration will take their course in the future. Thank you very much. And so he just wrapped up his presentation within 15 minutes. Thank you very much. And the third presentation is Dr. Pradeep Chauhan. Is ready?
Yes. Yes,
and
yes.
He is a political economist, and he's just a visiting scholar many the institutions in the worldwide, and he just working at the government, and also he just get the Agatha Harris Memorial Fellow at University of Oxford in 2007 to 2010. And then Dr. Chauhan already published 15 books, and he is expert on development economics and political economy of South Asia and the worldwide economy. And he's a member of national international academic bodies. He has been honored with many national and international awards for excellence in academic research. Okay, so Dr. Chauhan, it's your floor.
Okay, thank you very much for kind introduction. Yes, so actually I will be presenting now on regional collaboration in South Asia and can SAARC and BIMSTEC lead the world. So I was just listening earlier speakers, and Professor Kumiko Haba gave her conclusion that we should reorganize Asia in collaboration with EU and US to create a new world order. So I was thinking to define or redefine this topic, not to lead, but how to contribute, mean the SAARC and how the SAARC and BIMSTEC can contribute to lead the new world order. So, as many of you know, that there is a SAARC. SAARC is the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation of 8 countries in South Asia, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. And the recent member is Afghanistan. So SAARC was, formed long back in 1985, and there were, many problems running SAARC because of India-Pakistan relations, and right now also it is a little bit standstill because of that tension. So India is trying to, take lead in the BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC is the Bay of Bengal multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation, mean those countries which are on the Bay of Bengal. Most of the countries are from the SAARC, like the India is there, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and new addition is like Thailand and Myanmar. So if you see, both covers almost same percentage of population of the world. It is around 21% of the population, and almost you can say the 4% of GDP of the world. So in that context, how they can contribute in the regional cooperation? As you know, the South Asia is one of the world's most dynamic and diverse regions. A shared regional leitmotif, along with cultural, linguistic, topographical, economic diversity, lends the region a distinct identity. Its economies have demonstrated remarkable strength and resilience amid global slowdown, establishing their significance for global economic growth. Yet, aside from a collective experience of economic progress, the region also shares developmental challenges, continuing to close the poverty gap, improving infrastructure, strengthening institutions, harnessing the potential of its large youth population, and ensuring equitable growth are some of the most critical and overreaching priorities facing regional economies in South Asia. South Asia is among the world's least economically integrated region, if I say. Despite the advantages of proximity, structural and cultural familiarities, and shared developmental priorities, it is least economically integrated, constrained by disagreement stemming from past history, national pride, territorial disputes, ethnic and regional disturbances, mutual mistrust, and cross-border migration issues. The region has been unable to leverage the benefit of regional cooperation to bolster its common future interest. So deeper regional integration could, however, turn the sub-region into an important land bridge and trade hub between Europe, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. I should say the inception of multiple institutional frameworks for advancing regional cooperation, such as I told, SAARC and BIMSTEC, like Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, which we call a BBIN, and some other kind of further economic and monetary unions like SAFTA, South Asian Free Trade Area. But more than decades of its inception, and despite multiple bilateral free trade agreements, interregional trade accounts for barely 5% of South Asia's total trade compared to approximately 25% for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that is we call ASEAN. One of the biggest factors undermining interregional trade is the long sensitive list of products exempted by South Asian countries from the tariff liberalization program in the region. The average trade cost within South Asia are 20% higher than the corresponding cost within the ASEAN. Persisting high trade costs, the proliferation of multiple non-tariff and para-tariff barriers, poor trade facilitation at borders, lengthy sensitive list, and high connectivity cost continue to offset the positive impact of geography and proximity. What are the challenges of integration in Asia, as I discussed in this exposition earlier? That the challenges are related to diversity and integration, which are complex, but not exclusive to the region. Although European integration comes from the Second World War, cooperation in Southeast Asia rose from the polarized atmosphere of the Cold War. With a very different geopolitical context, the European Union has managed to overcome the regional dispute, particularly between France and Germany. The creation of ASEAN has been a milestone in promoting regional integration in Southeast Asia, which it has done through multiple tools such as ASEAN +3, ASEAN +6, as well as ALS, bilateral between ASEAN and neighboring countries, among others. The regional comprehensive economic partnership, which we call the RCEP, was the last of the major additions, although India has so far remained on the margin of this agreement. The RCEP, association or partnership of now 15 countries. 16th country was India, which opted itself out from this partnership because they have their own questions about the RCEP. But the RCEP, we can say it is the biggest regional cooperation treaty, comprising almost half of the population, 40% of the global commerce, 35% of GDP, we can say. But India opted from it out because of its own concern, and the particularly concern is China. Although India has this free trade agreements with all the 10 countries from ASEAN, and they have the FTA with Japan, with Korea, and some other members, but India opted from this RCEP. Although Japan is doing it hard to keep India, they ask India to be an observer, and Japan is also negotiating and keeping the option open for India to join later in the RCEP. So if the RCEP happens, as Professor Kumiko was also mentioning earlier about that the regional cooperation in Asia could not be developed in that way. But this RCEP could be a bridge between South Asia and East Asia, and the Asian regional cooperation can be, much better. And in this regional cooperation, how this South Asia can lead the world. The sub-regions shared colonial past and popular culture preferences, including prolific culinary undertones, vibrant entertainment industries, and common sports, reinforces South Asian identity and offer compelling cross-border drivers for better connectivity. Exploiting them by prompting intra-regional Tourism and direct action between people can help counteract confidence deficit and negative stereotype, as well as create a bulwark for lasting regional peace, reconciliation, and cooperation. I should say, above all, shared political will and incremental but tangible measures to anchor deeper integration have the potential to significantly strengthen cooperation in South Asia. As the region moves forward with an altered and more external economic orientation, greater economic integration and collaboration fueled by increased regional trade and investment promises that South Asia will realize its true growth potential and contribute in the larger Asian regional cooperation. In the light of global events around like Brexit, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and NAFTA that reflect the erosion of trust in existing multilateral collaborative framework, South Asia can provide the world with a new context for regional collaboration and revive the hope for a coherent and sustainable world order. As the region's largest economy in South Asia, particularly India, has the opportunity to pave the way for regional multilateralism through mutual interest. India is strategically positioned in South Asia. It is the only state that enjoys direct physical contact with all states in the region. Its central position within the regions allow it to be bridged between South Asian economies such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asian economies. Nepal and Bhutan, the two landlocked states, can also access the Southeast Asian region through India. So over the years, there has been several sub-regional initiatives linking the two regions. Sub-regional economies cooperation of South Asia, the Gulf Bengal initiative, as I call the BIMSTEC, ASEAN +1, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, BCIM initiative have India as a common factor. Not only India, other South Asian states have also increased their ties to Southeast Asian region. Indeed, as has been discussed in earlier, the commercial integration with ASEAN plus India FTA and bilateral FTA such as India, Singapore, India, Malaysia, Pakistan, Malaysia will include the service sector and finally the agriculture sector. The free movement of goods, services, labor, knowledge and capital within ASEAN and South Asia will pave the way for a common Asian market. The development of economic ties and connectivity between South Asia and Southeast Asia appears to be a natural and progressive movement towards growth and prosperity. Trade, connection and connectivity between the region are carried out across land border, sea routes and air connectivity. So from bilateral to multilateral, these efforts can be made and some efforts are made in past also. So there is a need for such kind of cooperation where South Asia and East Asia, although if there can be a cooperation at some level between India and China, although the India has a concern that China will take over the market of India, and recently India's, if you see the total deficit, trade deficit is around $105 billion, and about, from that $53 billion trade deficit is with China only. So almost half of the deficit is China. So India has this concern that if the RCEP will be there, so China will take over. So these are the issues. Taking consideration at time, just I conclude that the South Asia can play a leading role in the world because of its special characteristics. These two organizations, SAARC and BIMSTEC, focus on geographically overlapping regions, However, this does not make them equal alternative. SAARC is a purely regional organization, whereas BIMSTEC is a inter-regional and connect both South Asia and ASEAN. Insofar as their regions of interest overlap, SAARC and BIMSTEC complement each other in terms of functions and goals. BIMSTEC provides SAARC countries a unique opportunity to connect with ASEAN. And recently, India has actually enhanced its interest more in BIMSTEC than SAARC. So we can say this cooperation can be a bridge between South Asia and East Asia. Furthermore, with the agreement of RCEP, that Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which I mentioned earlier, which is a group of 15 Asian Pacific countries, 10 Asian nations, and 5 of its major trading partners, Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. So with all these initiatives, we can say that in future, these two SAARC and BIMSTEC, two organizations can play a very important role on the same which I started, that what Professor Kumiko Haba said, that we should reorganize Asia into collaboration with the EU and US, and where SAARC, South Asia, through BIMSTEC and SAARC can play a very significant role. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Chauhan. We just moved to the political economy and the sphere. Next presentation will deal with the political economy, especially and the monetary system. So next presentation will be the Tigona expert on the sustainable development also, and his just presentation will be connected to the previous presentation by the Dr. Chauhan. And the next presenter is the Chris Pope. And Chris Pope is currently assistant professor at the Kyoto Women's University, Japan, Kyoto. And he specialized in the East Asian politics, international relations, and the environment governance. And the focus currently focus governance in China and Japan. And he just published books with Dr. Jimin, who is the professor and University of Sydney, and on the translation of sustainable development goals in China and Japan. And he just published several articles on Chinese, Japanese international relations and governance. Okay, the Pope, Chris, it's your floor.
Okay, hello everybody. First, thank you for the organizers particularly for the chance to present, and also for the presenters today who have given me a lot to think about and certainly a lot to follow, but I'll do my best. I'm going to share a screen and we're going to go through a PowerPoint that I've made today. So when asked about this project, I thought of, well, what can I contribute? And I thought, well, actually, there seems to be a lot that can be said about the history and, how can we say this, of the post-war, and how this is evolved into discussions of global governance today through various factors, not least globalization and the internationalization of the economy or world economies. And I wondered how we can intertwine these with considerations about the crises that affect the international political economy. And I should say, more importantly, people in general all over the planet. So I started by thinking, well, what are those crises? And how do they intertwine? And in that way, what questions can we ask about the political economy moving forward to address the crises that that beset the planet and our future, particularly the future of young people. So with that in mind, I sort of briefly looked into, with nowhere near the same sort of expertise and detail as the panelists I've heard so far, post-crisis international settlements. And I suppose looking back on Professor Haba's work today, one argument one could make is that the UN is a certain type of settlement of such. But instead of talking about the UN today, I'm going to talk about the global world order that the US tried to incorporate into the international political economy during the Bretton Woods negotiations, and how that can be used as a kind of not a framework, but a base in order to think about what needs to be done now to address the crises that beset the planet. Now, I must say, I wrote this shortly before the coronavirus outbreak, and had it been 2 or 3 weeks longer, I certainly would have included the coronavirus in my list of crises. But oh well, let's do what I've done. Okay, so to not waste any more time, the main points of this article in the book and the presentation today is that the IPE, the International Political Economy, is not sustainable in its current form. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. It's not economically, and to understand, for example, Professor Boyd's arguments, it probably isn't politically either. You know, to understand, for example, how Trump's rhetoric gained traction along the Rust Belt in America, it's probably, certainly there are factors to do with economic change in the US that might play a role. To respond to the challenges ahead, an international settlement is necessary to coordinate internationalism. And this is because the problems that beset the planet are transnational in nature. Without international regulation and coordination in financial systems, it's unlikely that we'll be able to overcome the biggest problems, such as climate change. Okay, so what is a settlement? What do I mean by settlement? Well, I looked at Bretton Woods. This was the negotiations held by the ailing President Roosevelt and allied nations at Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire in 1944. Similarly ailing in health, John Maynard Keynes, as an associate, as a representative of the British delegate, attended this, and Harry Dexter White represented the US. The idea was to stabilize the world system, and this was understood simply on the basis of the Great Depression that had happened about 15 to 20 years earlier, 15 exactly, in fact. And the fact that Roosevelt and the New Dealers, and I think Professor Haba touched on, what was the way we put it, the 4 policemen? My understanding of Roosevelt's logic in this is that he understood that for capitalism to be sustainable, it has to be managed internationally, which is probably why he was willing to extend an olive branch to China and Soviet Union as well. But that's just a speculation on my part. And the second idea was to restructure international relations. And perhaps this is where US realism comes into the play. The US was one of the only, bar Switzerland, major international economies that was relatively intact after the war. But it was also, because, as I've just mentioned, with the Great Depression, the idea was to safeguard capitalism from what? Well, yes, with George Kennan's X article, as it's called, and the idea to contain communism was one factor, of course, but also from itself. I mean, the New Dealers that were in Washington at the time understood very well that capitalism has a tendency, when unregulated, as it was in the 1920s, to destroy itself because of equilibria in the system. So they developed a number of institutions that we know and recognize today. The International Monetary Fund is one, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, later buttressed by the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, but that was not part of Bretton Woods per se. But anyway, the IBRD becomes the World Bank, and maybe GATT and the later General Agreement on Trade and Services would become, well, let's say the World Trade Organization would overtake, it's not the word I'm looking for, would take over the the job of the IBRD, of GATT and GATS. So whose multilateralism are we talking about here? Why a settlement? I mean, I'm sure an argument in the US would be made. We're the most powerful nation in the world. Europe is economy is destroyed. There's a civil war going on in China. And Japan has suffered tremendously from the war. So why advocate for multilateralism in this context? Well, it seems to me that one of the reasons you would do this is so that you could have a discretionary power over where surpluses would go. And in that way, extend your reach as a hegemonic power into the world. And there's many reasons you can say that this is wrong, and there's many reasons you can say this is right. But I think material wealth is a factor. The US, therefore, as part of the Bretton Woods system, created a fixed exchange rate system in which the US dollar was tied to gold at $35 per ounce. So my grandma and granddad have lots of gold because before 1973, gold was very cheap compared to its price today, which I found out before I got married. Foreign currencies tied to gold were to range between -1% to +1%. Okay, so we can see there was maybe the New Dealers were involved, of course, the New Deal ideology, the need to regulate capitalism to make sure that its destructive tendencies are contained. And part of that, as we see in almost any economy, is a surplus recycling mechanism. So we could take Japan, for example. Well, I'm English. I know it happens in the UK, but we can take Japan, for example. The idea is that tax revenue and other surpluses from big cities like Nagoya, Osaka, Tokyo could be used through debt-fueled public investments in impoverished or poorer areas like Akita, Tottori, Kagawa, these areas, so that people in these regions can have jobs at the same time. So in an international way, the US decided that it would do this through Germany with the Marshall Plan, and eventually with Japan via the Korean War. But although I'm not sure how true this is, I have heard that the plan was actually initially to link up with the Kuomintang of China and have Japan and China relate like this. But of course, Mao Zedong won this contest and flatly refused such a proposition, I'm sure. But the idea was that the Great Depression must never occur again. And I think this is summed up in a line by Theodore Roosevelt where he says, the economic health of every country is a proper matter of all concern to all its neighbors near and far. Now, Harry Dexter White on the US side proposed the fixed exchange rate system, which I talked about. Valéry Destaing, the former finance minister and prime minister of France, sadly died 3 days ago from coronavirus. But in the 1970s, he called this the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. In other words, because the dollar was tied to gold, there's always demand for the dollar. And this is still true today. John Maynard Keynes tried to take how should we put this? The ability to recycle surpluses. He tried to institutionalize this through what's called an international clearing union, the Bancor. So this was French, banque for bank, or for gold, Bancor, one global currency. All international payments would be denominated in the Bancor. All members would hold an account at an international clearing bank, let's say at the IMF. Then banks would regulate the balance of surplus and deficits. So you can regulate with taxation, trade restrictions, interest payments. But the idea, so this sounds maybe a little bit nice, but there was politics involved as well, of course. Surplus and deficit limits was to be based on member shares of world trade. So there is still a political hierarchy in this process, in this vision. And it would certainly entail at the national level the bureaucratization of policy and the technocratization of the economy, well, to the extent that it already is at the international level. So the point of mentioning this is that the global order as defined by the fixed exchange rate system and Bretton Woods was not the only possible way of arriving at a settlement based on multilateralism and liberalist norms. So there's still room for discussion, is my point. So what happens with the death of Bretton Woods? Well, a lot, but I'll try and be brief because I know that my time is actually quite limited here today. It is, yes. My goodness. Okay. Well, an overextension of investment and war in Vietnam, basically. And in Europe, you're making money. Traders found a way to circumvent this regulation, and this caused a lot of issues. I'm from Britain, as I've mentioned. So Britain left this gold standard in 1967, as it did in the previous gold standard, and as it has left Europe. This is apparently what my country does. Pompidou also sent a destroyer to the US. So there was huge diplomatic tension. This resulted in the Nixon shock, in which they severed the tide from gold, and it caused a massive rise in primary commodities, the oil shocks. To address the attendant stagflation, Paul Volcker, while chair of the Federal Reserve, lifted the federal funds rate to its highest rate in history, which led to a loss of US industrial occupancy. This was followed by Reagan's high dollar policy, which, because of the need to repay debts in US dollars, triggered a third world debt crisis. And eventually globalization and financialization, because currency markets were increasingly volatile. And in these situations, there's a need to diversify assets. At the same time, as things were financing, the set of what's now called corporate raiders used junk bonds to take over undervalued corporations. And this changed corporate governance in the US to what's called the value maximization model, where you have got to get profit every quarter or you're out. And this changes how we manage the economy. This is followed by the IMF conditionality, which I guess imposes a kind of, sets an agenda for what kind of economic reform happens. And because of the end of the Cold War and the third world debt crisis, we find literally 1 billion people entering the capitalist system with over a period of about 15 years. I'm not sure how I'm going to finish this in time, I'm afraid. So I'll just briefly go over the crises as I've understood them. Today, I think that we've got an economic crisis because of an overextension of finance. And this is a different means of doing it. Canada, for example, to overcome the Lehman shock, triggered a housing bubble. There's austerity programs elsewhere. But it feels as though a lot of the world is stuck in a liquidity debt spiral. The consequence of this is that the credit expansion leads to private money, which facilitates further credit expansion and increases the debt divide, the wealth divide, I'm afraid. Sorry, the difference between profit and debt across sectors. And in this situation, finance can become political. As we've seen today, investors use courts to override the ability of the state to make policy and to default on their debts, and they can shut down the country's payment system. I also think that this kind of change has reduced the ability of the state to protect its labor force, and it's led to all kinds of crises, as we've seen. We have a migration crisis, which I guess I don't need to go into, with poor treatment of immigrants, and not only illegal immigrants, and refugees worldwide, but also a labor crisis. 75% of the workforce is in precarious employment. 11% of the world's children are in work, and a lot of those jobs are precarious and dangerous. So perhaps we should skip this. Okay, I'm sure that we all know about climate change, so I don't need to talk about what it is, but the economic connection, I assume, is relatively self-explanatory. The consumption, the accelerating consumption reduces the, it sort of goes away from the planet's ability to regenerate its own physical properties necessary for further consumption. But of course, the system we live in is dependent on access to natural resources such as raw material, labor, energy, and food, and they have to be abundant and cheap. If it's not, then this drive down profits, and it's a damage. It's a big threat to the sustainability of capitalism. There's two theories as to what is the primary cause, over accumulation or under consumption. I think in the case of underconsumption, it is definitely necessary for international coordination. At the end of the 2008 Lehman shock, the UN said it is clear that the current institutions and arrangements governing globalization and many national government policies have been based on a certain set of ideas and ideologies. These ideas and ideologies underlying key aspects of what various people have called neoliberal market fundamentalism or the Washington Consensus have been found wanting. So we ask, is there a basis today for a new monetary globalism? The UN calls for a true global currency reserve to overcome the fiduciary dollar standard. And we see the multipolarization of internationalization of money across many different countries, and not just China or Venezuela or whatever, but also maybe nations that you wouldn't expect, like the EU talking about the creation of a new SWIFT payment system, or so I'm told. So I don't think we have time to go into this anymore, I'm afraid, but I'll just finish with the conclusion. To address the crises at the heart of the IP, surely multilateral coordination is necessary. I think to have a more integrated method of coordination, it's necessary to talk about monetary systems as well, although it will probably seem far-fetched. It's interesting that the UN call for it, as well as China, as well as the former IMF chief Dominic Strauss-Kahn. Doing so is a project of undeniably political nature, but so is not doing so. So with the multipolarization in the international community and oncoming environmental crisis, monetary coordination and a new post-GFC settlement is necessary. I think it's beneficial to current programs like the UN SDGs because it allows for long-term sustainability investments, and it's beneficial possibly to even Green New Deals or whatever manifestations of those that arise, because it provides a discussion point for internationalizing it, which I think is extremely important. In the same way of regulating capitalism, surely regulating a Keynesian-based or modern monetary policy-based Green New Deal would require a high degree of international coordination. I'm sorry for taking so long, but that's my presentation. And well, I hope it provides, I don't know, food for thought. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to participate in the 7-minute discussion we've got left.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Boyd. Professor Pop. Well, we have here 2 questions to the Professor Chauhan. Can you see your chat? You have the 2 questions.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Should I read, or can you just I just summarize the question. How the India-Pakistan confrontation affected to the organization of the regional organization. So that's the first question. Second question is India's position in the India in the Pacific areas. So what is India's geographical setting in terms of the making regional integration in Asia? This is there are 2 questions.
Yes, thank you. My first question is regarding how India and Pakistan relations are affecting it so badly. Actually, there is a problem of cross-border terrorism.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear? Yes.
Yeah, now it's okay now.
Okay. Yeah. So India alleging for the last 70 years after 1947, when the India was divided into India and Pakistan, that Pakistan is sponsoring terrorism in Kashmir. Kashmir was divided into two parts. Half part is in Pakistan and half part is in India. So both countries are claiming that it is the whole Kashmir is their part. So there is a problem of cross-border terrorism in Kashmir. And due to that, sometimes the situation becomes so grave that both countries stop talking to each other. And it is affecting the regional cooperation in SAARC also. When they stop seeing each other, so sometimes the annual meetings, they didn't happen. And if I mention one example, that there are many goods which India can take from Pakistan and Pakistan can take from India, but they are not coming directly. They can transport easily because through road it's so close. But they are going to Singapore and other countries, and then they are coming to Pakistan to Singapore, Singapore to India. So this terrorism, cross-border terrorism, is creating that problem, and they stop talking to each other for the last, if I say, 2-3 years. There is no negotiation politically and economically in India and Pakistan. So this is the first question. Second is related with India. India's geographical position is no doubt you can say very significant for the Asian integration. It's geographical position, because through this Bay of Bengal, India is connecting to Thailand and Myanmar and rest of the South Asian country. Yes.
Aspetta un minuto, scusa, un secondo, che se no non riusciamo a parlare.
Excuse me. Oh yeah, thank you. So go on.
Yes.
Go ahead. Ciao.
Okay. Yeah. So geographically, India can be a gateway for rest of the South Asia. Even if you can, economically also. Mm-hmm. If China and East Asia, they are integrated. Here, India and South Asia. And now if India and China integrate, the whole Asia can be integrated. So that in that way, we consider that India has a very important strategic position to integrate whole Asia.
Okay, thank you very much. It seems to be hard to form the regional integration in Asia between China and India. It's not a friendly relations right now.
Yeah. These days they are very tensed.
Okay. We don't have any.
May I ask to the Professor Gabe? Okinawa is also a very important place to collaborate with the Asian region. So in a conclusion, if it's possible, please explain the Okinawa's position to make Asian regional cooperation. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. So I respond to you quickly. The Okinawa is very, the kind of center of the dynamics of politically, geopolitically speaking. And then this time, under the new administration in the United States, affected the position of Okinawa especially. And I hope I have just a question to the Patrick, to the U.S.-China trade war still continue even after the Biden administration started. This is the question. And the second question is I want to give the second question to the Chris. And Chris, can you hear me? I have a question. You just mentioned about the monetary system, and United States, American economic power is declining, especially, and this means the dollar domain position will be declining. It means the it's a good thing for the, the internationalize the international monetary system or not? That's the second question. And I give the Patrick first question. And what happened to the trade war?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Well, first of all, I think that China will continue to be treated by the United States as a strategic competitor. I don't think that will change. You saw that shift happen over the course of the Obama administration. So by the end, they were clearly treating China as a strategic competitor. And I would imagine there's simply no way that Biden, either politically or really practically, would be able to, greatly change that position. What will be interesting is what will happen with these phase one agreements that the Trump administration reached. My understanding of them is that they largely put all of the difficult things in the unresolved pile and simply essentially agreed to some of the easier things with the hope that they would continue to work out the remaining issues, which means they've left all of the difficult issues for Biden practically. So I'm not sure exactly. We've yet to see clearly what Biden's views are of the phase one agreement, and I'm interested to learn more. I wish I could give you a more detailed response, but I do think that you will continue to see, just because Trump is gone, I don't think we're necessarily going to see super warm relationships between China and the United States, including in the trade area.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Regarding the question, if the end of the dollar standard would be a good or bad thing?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're looking at. If it's, to the extent that a lot of it is tied in the trading of primary commodities such as oil and coal and for other fossil fuels in the US dollar, then maybe from a climate change perspective, it might open a window for different types of currency systems that are tied to green growth. But I guess from an American people's perspective, I think this would be a really, really tough time because, as a result of this trade, it being used as a global currency, the demand for the dollar is higher than it would be, in any other situation. And so were it to lose that status as the global currency, let's say overnight, the value of it would just plummet. And I don't even trust my own judgment as to what would happen to the bond markets then. So in this situation, I guess it's part of a rebalancing act where the US would have to no longer focus on its twin deficits, but instead look at exporting. But I don't think that's a really viable alternative, given that, the competition for wages, for example, and where would they export to if the US had no longer had a massive market that the world relied on. So I think whatever happens, it's going to be tough. But as I mentioned in the start of the presentation, I don't think that the IPE is sustainable as it is anyway. And so now of all times, must surely in the spirit of multilateralism, be a time when we talk seriously, as the UN advocated, about regulating a monetary regime which could see the end of this system without unnecessary suffering. So in that respect, I would be practical, but also quite, worried. But I think perhaps it would be the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Well, I have to respond to the Kumiko's question. To me, it's very, this is the, we have the under the COVID-19, but we need Chinese tourists to Okinawa, and we need many, the foreign investment to Okinawa. So I just, we are very fragile economy and politically speaking in terms of that. And so we have to, from Okinawan viewpoint, we have to look at how the international, the environment, politically, economically changing. We are very clearly, carefully.
Hello.
other situations. Okay. So is there any? This is a time to wrap
I
up.
answer a question or comment of the Pardeep Chauhan shortly. Yes, because I wrote in a conclusion that second page I'm concentrating to research about the Japan-China-Korea cooperation, and especially nowadays starting the RCEP and the CPTPP as well. So I wrote to the regional cooperation, like not only the bilateral one, multinational cooperation like RCEP, CTPPP, and SAC as well. So it is very important, the presentation, Pardeep Chauhan spoke about the Central and South Asia and Southeast Asia. So that's why in the future we need to collaborate not only the East Asia but also the Central and South Asia as well. About that, perhaps in Kyoto University, Sanchul Park from Korea will speak about the CTPPP. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any comments among the panelists? Are there? You want to say something before closing the session?
You asking me?
All of you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Professor Kumiko, you are right that although we both are involved in this joint research collaboration on regional cooperation, integration in Asia, but yes, India and China both are very important countries for this regional cooperation, and we need to work more on these security issues and peace issues at border. Recently, there were a lot of tension between India and China. So yes, that is very important to work on this regional integration, including all these parts of East, South, Central Asia. Thank you very much, Professor Kumiko, and all the panelists and all.
Okay, as a chair and the timekeeper, I have to close this session now. Thank you very much for the joining us, and thank you for all panelists to be there with you tonight. Okay.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.